Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to BBG. This is your host, Kenton Hawkins, and today we're going to be talking about the African Jews. Last time we covered the East African Jews and how Jews got into Africa in the first place. Now we're about to talk about the West African Jews and continue on from the 15th century all the way up to the present time. Jews have lived in West Africa as early as the 6th century BCE when the first temple was destroyed. It wouldn't be until the First Jewish-Roman War and the destruction of the Second Temple that we get a good estimate of how many Jews ended up in North Africa, specifically Northwest Africa. And it was around between 30 to 50,000 Jews who ended up in Tunisia and Morocco. Between the 2nd and 4th century, Jews started migrating down south into a new empire called the Wagado Empire. This is possibly due because of the 3rd century crisis that was going on in Rome. The earliest account that we have of Jews settling in West Africa, it is between the 8th and 9th century CE, where we get documents about Yemenite Jews settling in the Wagado Empire. Between the 13th century all the way up to the 15th century, more Jews from Southern Europe and North Africa would settle in the wealthiest empire at the time, the Mali Empire. Timbuktu became a popular place for Jews to settle in, especially after the great Emperor Mansa Musa I. On August 2nd, 1492, the Jews who were living in Spain were now expelled from the kingdom. Most of them fled into the Ottoman Empire, while a small handful of Jews fled to Timbuktu at the time that was still controlled by the Mali Empire. But the Jews who were living in Timbuktu, their time was extremely short. 7 months later, in April 1493, the new king of the Songhai Empire, Askia Muhammad, expelled all the Jews in his empire. Most of the Jews would end up fleeing back into the north, while a small group of Jews would end up fleeing down south into other empires like the Akan, Oyo, and Benin Empire. It wouldn't be until the 18th and 19th century that Jews would end up back into Timbuktu. Now let's rewind back for a second and look at what was going on in East Africa between the 15th century to the present time. Now, around the same time when the Jews were expelled from the Songhai Empire, Great Zimbabwe, one of the largest empires south of the Sahara, was abandoned. No more than 200 years later, Ethiopia was going through a succession crisis called the Era of Judges, or the Era of Princes. It's because of these two moments in history that the Jews in Africa lost contact with the Jews in Europe and Asia. It wouldn't be until the mid-19th century that the Jews would reconnect with the Sub-Saharan African Jews. But between them times, thanks to the colonial era, the trans-Sahara transatlantic slave trade, that the Jewish people in Europe would distance themselves from the Jews in Sub-Saharan Africa and go even further, claiming that they were either authentic Jews or not Jews at all. And this is because during the 15th century all the way up to the 20th century, the Sephardic Jews ended up in the Ottoman Empire, the Ashkenazi Jews ended up in Poland, and a mixture of both ended up in Holland, will be later on called the Netherlands. Between the 17th century to the 18th century, Poland was in constant threat with Russia. And by the end of the 18th century, Poland ended up being annexed by Russia. All the Jews that were now in the Russian Empire were placed in a land called the Pella Settlement. The Pella Settlement was pretty much an open prison. It wouldn't be until the 1915s when the Pella Settlement would end. And around that time, while the Russian Empire was colonizing Northeast Asia, the Western European power were more focused on colonizing Africa. Some of the most wealthiest Jews were in on colonization. And this is why most of them wouldn't really help the African Jews, at least not in the same way how they helped the Asian Jews. The one Sub-Saharan African group that was accepted as Jewish were the Beta Israel. Well, pretty much half of the Jewish world accepted the Beta Israel as Jews. The one people who didn't for a while were the Ashkenazi Jews, specifically the Russian Jews, who, like I said earlier, were in the Pella Settlement. And even before the Pella Settlement, majority of them Jews lived in Poland who didn't travel around the world like the Sephardic and the Western European Jews. The Sephardic Jews have accounts of the Beta Israel going all the way back to the 12th century, with the first man to encounter with them was Benjamin of Tudela. Keep in mind, Benjamin of Tudela was also the first European to travel in Arabia ever since the rise of Islam. According to Benjamin Tudela, there was over 7,000 Ethiopian Jews who lived in the kingdom of Semia. showing that the kingdom of Simeon was older than people originally thought. For the next 500 years, the Ethiopian Jews remained in contact with the Sephardic Jews up in Egypt and Palestine. And this is the reason why Ethiopian Jews were accepted into Israel. But of course, not all of them accepted the Beta Israel as Jews. The Russian Jews, who I mentioned earlier, were in the Pella settlement around the same time when the Beta Israel were in the era of Judges. Succession crisis. The Beta Israel and the Ashkenazi Jews in Russia never encountered with each other. And this is why it was hard for the Ashkenazi Jew to accept the Beta Israel as Jews, since they never have any historical records with the Beta Israel. And because the Ashkenazi Jews, some of them still to this day doesn't accept the Beta Israels as Jews, the Beta Israel ended up taking DNA tests to show that they do have Jewish ancestry. And since the Jewish world worldwide doesn't accept the Lemba and the West African Jews as indigenous Jews, the West African and the Lemba also took DNA tests to show that they are indeed Jewish by birth and not Jewish converts. When it comes to the Lemba, majority of their Y chromosome is from non-African ancestry. Majority of their non-African DNA comes from Y haplogroup J, which is a Middle Eastern DNA that is more common to Jewish people and Arabians. And the mixture of their Y chromosome DNA showed that they have a common ancestors with the Jewish people and the Samaritans, called the Y chromosome Aaron, named after the first high priest and the older brother of Moses. And not only the fact that the Lemba have this DNA, the crazy part about it is that their DNA is higher than all the Jewish people around the world, showing that the oral tradition of them migrating from Israel to Yemen and to South Africa is indeed true. And now while the Lemba use secular scientists to take their DNA tests, the Igbo Jews, who also tried to migrate into Israel, also relied on DNA tests, but they ended up using a group called the Messianic Jews, who are to this day are not recognized as Jewish by the Jewish world, but are recognized as a unique version of Christianity. Anyways, the Messianic Jews told the Igbo Jews that they weren't Jewish by birth and had to convert. One Igbo Jewish man named Dr. Remy Aloma took his DNA test to MyHeritage and found out that he did have Jewish ancestry, or at least ancestry from the Middle East, showing that people from the Middle East did in fact travel into Nigeria and other places in West Africa. And this is where I'm gonna go ahead and end my video. For Black History Month, I'm gonna talk about the history of music and sports. So stay tuned, subscribe, and remember, Black and brown people have equal place in history.